really excited about this one because today we're going to talk about one of the biggest mysteries, still unsolved mysteries of science, that scientists still struggle to find a definite resolution. There are plenty of theories, but we still do not know for sure where did it all come from. So what are the origins of life? For those who don't know me, my name is Wielgopolan. I work in the Institute of Geophysics, Polish Academy of Sciences. We know how life, once it began, was able to grow, to diversify until it filled and created every niche on the planet. But there's one most obvious big question: how did life arise in the first place from inorganic matter? So this remains a great unknown, but as I said, there are plenty of theories, and I'm going to show you some of them and discuss some of them more in detail. So to determine the origins of life, scientists are investigating the problem in several different ways. So some scientists are studying life that is currently on our own planet, on Earth, and some scientists are looking for fossils of life on other planets or moons in our solar system, and other scientists are trying to find life in other solar systems by very interesting, almost science fiction methods like FRBs. FRBs are radio signals, one of the most mysterious phenomena in the universe. Even not that long ago, it was written somewhere, probably in Science or Nature, that scientists detected this radio signal, a very strong radio signal coming from very, very far away, from outside our solar system, from some distant planet, and we do not know the origin of it. Who sent it? What sent it? Where did it come from? Is it the evidence that aliens are real? We don't know that for sure. But some scientists believe that these signals may be produced by advanced life. So this image shows that from a single cell in the very beginning, we managed to become humans that we are today. But it doesn't mean that the evolution is over. And this also shows how difficult this road must have been. And like I said, some of the scientists are looking for traces in fossils on Earth, and here's an example of 3.5 billion year old lava, and they're trying to look for some, at least some signs that there was life and what was the life. So to sum up the crucial things that we do not know, at least for sure. First of all, where did water come from? And water in fluid state, not in solid state, is very unusual in the universe, at least in the universe that were able to visit with our probes, with our spaceships, not only with humans. The other question is, how is it possible that those basic substances, basic chemicals that were on early Earth, suddenly arranged themselves into life? What was it? What triggered them? What was the reason? What was the mechanism? The other one is, how did we get this amazing DNA that is a connection between all the organisms, and that is a sort of a code showing what the organisms look like, how they behave, and so on and so on. And of course, the accurate question: are we alone in the universe? So, is there life, maybe developed or intelligent life, on other planets or moons other solar systems. So those were the questions that were very powerful since the beginning of time. So people had many ideas how the life appeared. In the early days, even in Middle Ages, they believed that it was very spontaneous, and that spontaneous generation continued not only in early days of Earth, but also now. So they believed that if there was a meat that was spoiled, that was decayed, that produced some worms, let's say, because they were observing that there was meat and that went to waste, and suddenly there were maggots, for example. The same was with mice. They believed that mice were appearing in grain, just like that, because that was their observation. But already in 17th century, the spontaneous generation of life was called out of date theory. So people realized that it wasn't so. Now I'd like to show you a short history of Earth. Maybe it's better to show you a movie, but now let's just take a brief look at the timeline. So here's probably the beginning. The formation of Earth is here, and then there were other processes like formation of core, and so on and so on. And here's where we appear. So we are here not for such a long time from the Earth's perspective. But now let's see, because it's quite difficult to imagine 4.5 billion years, but maybe it's easier if we imagine that Earth existed for 24 hours only. I think personally that was quite impressive to make this comparison. But back to our topic. So after the big beginning here, so the formation of planet as such, 4.56 billion years ago, there were other processes. So probably when the first type of life appeared, 3.8 billion years ago is our current best guess for the beginning of life on Earth. So the first life may have developed in undersea vents that go up. They were probably alkaline environments, and probably they were based rather, or there was no DNA. They were based rather on RNA than DNA. So Earth took its time and actually was coping quite well without life and without developed life. So as you can see, once again, 3.8 billion years ago, very beginning of life probably, and then 3.5 billion years ago, we recorded oldest fossils of some organisms that were single-celled organisms, and probably what they were doing was feeding on methane. Remember, there is no oxygen at that point, for example. Then, 3 billion years ago, we are quite sure there were viruses. They were present at that time, but we are not sure. Probably they appeared even earlier. Maybe they developed as life developed parallel. I mentioned that for the first half of our planet's history, there was no oxygen in the atmosphere. So this life-giving and crucial gas started to appear about 2.4 billion years ago. And actually, it's the first massive extinction event. So we are used to treat oxygen as a gas of life. So we cannot survive, and most of organisms cannot survive without oxygen. But actually, the appearance of oxygen was the first and the biggest massive mass extinction, the most dramatic of all extinctions, but left no traces, no fossils, because it only wiped out many bacteria. So the 2.4 billion years ago is a great oxidation event. We can also call oxygen catastrophe, oxygen crisis, great oxidation, or oxygen revolution. How is it possible? Well, it's all possible thanks to cyanobacteria. So the increased production of oxygen was a complete revolution. It set Earth's original atmosphere out of balance. And oxygen was a poison. It was poisonous for large numbers of organisms, which were so-called anaerobic organisms. So they were breathing without oxygen, let's say. It's just simplification. So many types of bacteria were eliminated. And when something is eliminated, the nature is that there are new niches created. So, but what made the oxygen, like I said, thank you cyanobacteria, supposedly this oxygen was a poisonous waste, a waste product produced by cyanobacteria, and cyanobacteria were photosynthetic. So we know that photosynthesis creates oxygen. And oxygen, there was more and more of cyanobacteria, more and more of oxygen, and started to build up in the atmosphere. And actually it has, how do we know? It has some geological consequences. So dissolved oxygen from the atmosphere reacted with iron in the oceans. And what happens when we put iron to the air? What happens in time? When we expose iron to oxygen, to atmosphere today. Well, it gets destroyed, it gets rust, it gets this brown rust layer. So this iron became rust and was sinking to the seafloor, and it was forming, for example, banded iron formations that we can observe today. So this is one of the ways that we know that this happened. Probably we should thank not only cyanobacteria but also volcanic activity, because volcanic activity probably made the methane-producing bacteria decline, and because methane reacts with oxygen. So if there was so much methane, we would not be able to build up the amount of oxygen in the atmosphere. But this way, with less methane production, the nature was able to produce and produce lots of oxygen in the atmosphere. But we are still in one cellular organisms, but the big revolution was the creation of multicellular organisms. They appeared more or less 2 billion years ago. Simply, some cells stopped going separate ways after replicating, after creating new cells, and stuck together and evolved with some specialized functions. So this gave rise to Earth's first lineage of multicellular organisms. And for example, such as this one, and this one's 1.2 billion year old fossilized algae that we have here. Actually, Bangiomorpha pubescens. It's not that important, but this is an actual fossil of 1.2 billion years old multicellular organism. But why would cells want to do that? Of course, it's not that cells are doing anything consciously, but what would be the benefit of becoming a multicellular organism? What do you think? Why is it better to be a multicellular organism than a single cellular organism? Even a simple multicellular one. Well, I can think of one, and it's the movement, because it's easier to spread, easier to move, easier to attach to some rocks, to some surface, and it's less likely to be washed away. And also, if you can move, you can be easier protected from UV radiation. So remember, at that time there was no ozone layer, so the Earth, all that was on Earth, was exposed to UV radiation. So it was crucial to be able to protect yourself from this radiation, which is was and is destructive. So here we come to a classic chicken or egg dilemma. That means what came first, a chicken or egg? Well, because this time it's not about chicken or egg, but it's about our genetical code. I said that first came RNA, not DNA. So the problem is, in order to life to start, there must be some kind of genetic stuff like DNA, RNA, because this RNA, this genetic molecule is capable of passing like a model to make proteins, because this is how proteins are created, on a base of RNA or DNA. Okay, so we need RNA to create proteins, but actually modern cells cannot copy DNA or RNA without proteins. So what came first, proteins or genetic molecule? This was the dilemma. So we need protein RNA, but we need our RNA to have proteins. But actually, there is a solution that came with the discovery about 20 years ago, because there are certain types of RNA that do not need proteins, so they can act as enzymes themselves. So this means that there was a single type of molecule, RNA, might be able to code the information and replicate the information without need of any proteins. So this is the idea of self-replicating molecules, which we call the RNA world. So This is one of the paradoxes probably solved, but the origin of life is set of paradoxes actually. So probably the early world was an RNA world. Question, another chicken on or egg? No, not this time. But what do you think that came first? Animals or plants? I'm not talking about bacteria, I'm not talking about cyanobacteria, I'm simply talking about animals or plants. What appeared first on Earth? What do you think? So, the animals. The animals were first. Of course, we're totally... I would say that plants are the first thought that we think of, because we think plants creating oxygen and food for animals. That's our first thought. But for now, scientists believe that animals came earlier. And actually, the first animals were quite primitive, but we can still meet them on Earth. They are sponges. They seem very primitive. They lack organs. They don't have muscles. They don't have nerves. But still, they are multicellular animals, and they reproduce sexually. So let's watch a short video about the very first ancestors of ours, very first animal ancestors. They appeared about 430 million years ago. Okay, you could spot the difference between the time I gave you, 430 million years ago, and more than 600 million years ago. And yes, but recently and until now, it's the first date that is given, that 400 million years ago, and the second one is yet to be confirmed and widely accepted by the scientists. So we had our single cellular organisms, we had oxygen, then first multicellular organisms, we had first animals, but we know that the tree of life is not that simple, it's rather complex and complicated. So we have this feature called biodiversity that we're trying to protect now, actually. So we call biodiversity a total sum of life from one hand, but on the other hand, it's a range of differences between forms. So the more forms are different in how they look, how they breed, how they eat, the more biodiverse the world is. And biodiversity is actually the most complex feature of our whole planet. Why? Because, for example, there are 100,000 known species of beetles alone, only beetles. And of course, there we have different kinds of plants, animals. So without biodiversity, there would be no humanity, for example. And what with the mechanism of it? So actually, it's because of the evolution. And here is a great simplification of evolution mechanism that shows us how it was possible to create all this biodiversity. And it's all about adaptation and about mutations in genes. So we have an ancestor, we have mutations of genes, and we have some mutations that didn't go well. They are eliminated. They are so-called unfavorable mutations. But we have then some favorable mutations that were well adapted to the environment, like to more oxygen and so on and so on. So they were reproducing, there's more of them, but maybe the condition changed. So again, the favorable mutations were more likely to survive, and the others were eliminated, and so on for billions of years. So this selection and mutations, and also time, is a key to creation of all this, starting from a single cell. I mentioned that we have a problem with viruses. Well, viruses were always kind of problematic because are they alive or are they not alive? Well, they have genetic code, but not more than that. What are they, and when did they actually appear? And scientists believe that there was they discovered a huge virus that might be a missing link in a history of life's origin. So in 1992, researchers discovered this giant virus. It's giant because it has more than 1,200 genes. It has so much DNA that some called it a viral missing link. It's very big for a virus. It's 400 nanometers big, so it's like a half of E. coli cell, but for a virus, it's gigantic. Normal viruses make their host, because they're parasites, produce proteins for them. But this huge virus with this very long name, they contain DNA that is encoding molecules, and so they are able to translate this message, this genetic message, to proteins themselves without a host, we must say. So probably this is first of all, they were able to steal genes from other organisms, and probably there is a new chapter in virology that is still to be discovered, and maybe a very interesting field of research for you maybe in the future. The big question is, how do scientists know all of that? It all happened so long time ago that it's really hard to find a record. We do not have too many traces. Well, we have some. Well, there are different techniques. For starters, we have experiments, and we're going to talk for a while about a very special and very famous experiment from 1950s, so-called Miller-Urey experiment, and it's primordial soup. But we do have some traces that allow us to reconstruct the history of life on Earth. First, there are rocks with very old fossils, and I would like you, if I want you to remember one thing from this lesson, is stromatolites. So we can find some oldest fossils, very specific ones. The other way is to use so-called molecular clocks in the DNA of living organisms. So we are doing research on living organisms, but in their DNA we're searching traces of older processes and very, very old DNA as well. Another way is to search for life in very extreme environments, like underneath the ice sheet of Antarctica, like in hot vents in oceans, so those very hot, very saline environments that are so unfriendly, but still they hold some life. So we're thinking maybe this is how what the life looked like in the very beginning, when the conditions were like that everywhere. So these are ways that scientists do it in short. So let's start with an experiment that is a very important one, a little bit controversial one about its results. So for years it was said, it's not that good and it doesn't explain anything, but lately it is considered again to be very valuable. So it was actually quite simple. It was conducted in 1953. At least it was published in 1953 by two scientists, Stanley Miller and Harold Urey. They were both from the University of Chicago, and there was an experiment that you can see here. So it basically made organic compounds out of inorganic ones. How? By applying some form of energy. So this is an energy, this is also energy. We have electrodes. So we have heat, we have electricity, like from thunder, for example. There's this spark, and we have this zoop. There is one organic element, which is methane, but the others are inorganic: water, ammonia, and hydrogen. So their molecules that they were able to produce were very simple organic molecules, and it's not a complete living system, but it proved that those hypothetical processes could produce some elements of life, like this, from a so-called primordial soup. So there was lots of gases, lots of inorganic elements in the atmosphere. There was reaction with the oceans, and organic matter, for example, thanks to electricity and heat, could be created spontaneously, we might say. As for DNA traces, DNA living fossils, well, it's a little bit complicated, so I'm just going to say that biologists use the DNA sequences of modern organisms to reconstruct the tree of life and to figure out what was our recent common ancestor, the most recent common ancestor of all living things. This is something that we're searching for from archaea, bacteria, and eukaryotes. So this is like a reconstructing of early branches on the tree of life. This is all that you need to know for now, but stromatolites is a different case. So I mentioned that there are very, very old fossil traces of early life, and stromatolites are the oldest fossils on Earth. And they are the only fossils on Earth that are representing the most of Earth's history, because when we find dinosaurs remains, they're very, very old, but they went extinct like 66 million years ago, so not that long time ago comparing to bacteria billions of years ago. So modern stromatolites exist as well, but in places that have rather hostile conditions to any other type of life. So what are stromatolites? They look like rocks, but actually they are built from microbial mats that formed in limestone or dolostone forming environments. So they're the oldest physical evidence for life, and the oldest ones come from Greenland. Like they look a little bit like this, and they probably formed 3.7 billion years ago, probably. So this is a trace that microbes, especially cyanobacteria, lived then, and they were reproducing, replicating, creating oxygen, and forming those structures. But there are other ideas, of course. We're talking mostly about something that scientists call the theory of abiogenesis. So there were inorganic materials, and for some reason, because of energy and so on, the life appeared and was created on Earth. But there are other theories too, like exogenesis and panspermia. That is, let's say, very similar, the modification of exogenesis. So exogenesis basically says that we are all Martians. At least our common ancestors were. So it's an alternative to earthly origin of life theory. It is a hypothesis that primitive life might have been formed on other planets, other than Earth, in space, or on nearby planets such as Mars. The other question is how they formed there, or where did they come from? But is another thing. So that the Earth wasn't the home of life, that it was brought to the Earth. And there's evidence on that, and there's evidence that life originated especially on Mars. Mars is not that far away from us, and that life was brought in a sort of a Noah's Ark, which was a meteorite. And the theory says that Mars may have been habitable billions of years before Earth. And we have a proof, because there's in 1984, scientists recovered a meteorite from Mars, and they claim it contained some fossil life inside it. It's not 100% sure, as there is still discussion. So the question is still unresolved. But there is another, we might say, evidence supporting this hypothesis. So to form RNA, and we agreed that early we were mostly RNA world, not DNA world. So to form RNA, we need special minerals. And the minerals that are most effective in that are boron and molybdenum. I marked them here so you can see the Mendeleev's chart of elements. So we have boron and we have molybdenum. So they are needed in rocks to exist, but they probably did not exist in sufficient form, in sufficient amount in the early Earth, but probably in the early Mars there was plenty of it. So it's likely that RNA was created there on Mars because there was lots of boron and molybdenum, and then it was brought to the Earth. As I mentioned, there's also panspermia hypothesis, which is a little bit like exogenesis, but it states that it originated from space, from outer space, from microorganisms. How did they get there and how they were created is another thing. But that it also says there was lots of life around us in outer space, and it was not only on Mars, but it was like everywhere. The seeds of life were everywhere. And the proposed transport methods, so how did it get to Earth, include meteorites, comets, something like that. So this is another theory, and this is the last one that I want to share with you. So, of course, this is not where the origins of life or the story of life end, because there are millions of years of evolution, but that's another story. So, thank you very much for your attention.